The note felt like a sliver of ice in my hand, a stark, cold thing in the manufactured warmth of the wedding hall. Table 8. The spidery handwriting read, "Add shrimp to the child's portion." My breath caught in my throat. My grandson, 7-year-old Noah, was sitting at table 8, and Noah was deathly allergic to shrimp. Anaphylactic shock, a closed-off throat, the frantic, desperate gasp for air. I knew the horror of it because I had held his tiny body once before, his face blue and swollen, as paramedics fought to bring him back from the brink. It wasn't a mistake you make twice. It wasn't a detail you forget. Especially not on a day like this, a day that was supposed to be about new beginnings, about my son, Daniel, finding happiness again after losing his first wife, my dear Clara, 3 years ago. I looked across the cavernous room with its gaudy floral arrangements and rivers of white silk. Daniel was at the head table, his eyes shining as he looked at his new bride, Isabel. She was a vision. I'll give her that. Flawless porcelain skin, a smile that could charm a snake, and a whispery voice that made every man in the room lean in a little closer. To everyone else, she was perfect. The sweet, beautiful woman who was healing my son's broken heart. The brave soul willing to be a mother to a little boy who wasn't hers. But I had seen the cracks in her perfection, the little fissures that no one else seemed to notice. I saw it in the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at Noah. I saw it in the way she'd gently move his hand off her pristine dress, as if his touch were a stain. And most of all, I saw it in Noah himself, my grandson, who was once a whirlwind of joyful energy, had become a quiet, watchful shadow of himself in the months since Isabel entered our lives. He flinched when she came near. He'd hide behind my legs, his little hands gripping my skirt, his eyes wide and fearful. He had nightmares. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd just shake his head, a tear rolling down his cheek, and whisper, "I miss Mommy." Daniel, bless his grieving heart, was blind to it all. He saw Isabel's actions as the awkward adjustments of a new stepmother, Noah's fear as lingering grief for Clara. "Give them time, Mom," he'd say, a tired plea in his voice. "She's trying so hard." But this note, this wasn't an awkward adjustment. This was a death sentence scribbled on a cocktail napkin. I'd found it by pure chance. Noah had dropped his little toy soldier under the table, and when I'd bent down to retrieve it, my fingers had brushed against the folded paper tucked neatly under the tablecloth's hem, right by his empty seat. It was a secret message, passed from a monster to her executioner. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated act of murder. Isabel, the perfect bride, had tried to kill my grandson, and as I stood there, the sounds of celebration turning to a dull roar in my ears, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. This wedding was not going to continue. I was going to burn her perfect world to the ground. I straightened my back, the note clutched in my fist like a weapon, and began to walk toward the head table. Every step was a drumbeat, counting down the final seconds of her charade. The first time I met Isabel, she brought a bouquet of lilies to the house. "For Clara's memory," she'd said, her voice dripping with a practiced sympathy that set my teeth on edge. Daniel had beamed, his eyes full of gratitude. But I knew Clara had hated lilies. She'd always said they were for funerals, too somber and cloying. It was a small thing, a detail easily missed by a man drowning in grief. But it was the first crack I saw in the perfect facade Isabel presented to the world. She hadn't bothered to learn a single true thing about the woman she was supposedly honoring. She was simply playing a part, and playing it brilliantly. In the months that followed, The cracks widened. I watched her with Noah, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. She was a master of subtle cruelty, of tortures that left no visible marks. Once, she accidentally donated the worn-out teddy bear Clara had made for Noah, the one he slept with every night. She'd feigned utter devastation when Noah dissolved into inconsolable sobs. "Oh, my sweet boy, I am so sorry. I just thought it was an old toy," she'd cried, pulling him into a hug that he stiffened against. But I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes before she buried her face in his hair. She wasn't just replacing Clara, she was systematically erasing her, one precious memory at a time. Daniel remained willfully blind, so desperate for a return to normalcy that he accepted her every action at face value. He saw a caring woman trying to connect with a grieving child. I saw a predator isolating its prey. Their home, once filled with Clara's warmth and Noah's laughter, began to feel like a showroom. Everything was white, sterile, and breakable. Isabel's taste. Clara's colorful paintings were replaced with bland, abstract art. The comfortable, worn-in sofa where Noah and Daniel would cuddle was swapped for a stiff, modern piece of furniture that no one dared to sit on. The most chilling incident happened about a month before the wedding. I'd come over to find Noah sitting alone in the backyard, his face streaked with tears. In his hands were the torn-up remains of a photograph. It was the last picture of him with his mother, taken at his 6th birthday party. "Isabel said it was getting faded," he whispered, his small voice thick with misery. "She said she would get me a new one, but I only want this one." When I confronted Isabel, she put on her most wounded expression. "Helen, how could you think that? He was playing with it, and it ripped. I was only trying to comfort him by promising a new one." Her lies were so smooth, so plausible. She made me feel like the crazy one, the overbearing mother-in-law looking for trouble. She had Daniel so thoroughly convinced of her goodness that he looked at me with disappointment. "Mom, please. You're upsetting her. She loves Noah." That was the moment I knew how truly dangerous she was. She wasn't just apathetic to Noah's pain, she seemed to feed on it. She saw him not as a child to be loved, but as an obstacle. He was the living, breathing embodiment of Daniel's past, a constant reminder of the woman who would always hold his heart in a way she never could. And she resented him for it, with a cold, quiet fury that hid behind a perfect smile and gentle hands. I started watching her every move, documenting the small cruelties, the chilling glances, the lies that dripped like poison from her lips. I was gathering ammunition, though I didn't yet know what war was coming. Standing in that reception hall, with the neatly folded note in my hand, I finally understood. She wasn't just trying to erase Clara's memory. She was trying to erase her son. Clutching the note, I felt a tremor of fury run through me. This was it. This was the proof I needed, the undeniable evidence that would shatter the illusion Isabel had so carefully constructed. No more subtle cruelties he could explain away, no more plausible deniability. This was a signed confession. I intercepted Daniel as he was making his way from the head table to the dance floor, pulling him into a small alcove hidden behind a curtain. The music and laughter from the reception felt a world away. "What is it? Mom?" he asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. He was high on the moment, his face flushed with champagne and happiness. "Is everything all right?" "No, Daniel, nothing is all right." I unfolded the crumpled napkin and held it out for him to see. My hand was shaking, but my voice was steady. "I found this under Noah's seat. Table 8. Add shrimp to the child's portion." He squinted at the note, his brow furrowing in confusion. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of concern, but it was quickly extinguished. He shook his head. a small dismissive laugh escaping his lips. It's probably just a mix-up with the catering staff. Mom. Someone at table 8 must have wanted shrimp for their kid. Their kid? Daniel. Noah is the only child at table 8. You know he's deathly allergic. This isn't a mix-up. It's a death sentence. My voice rose, laced with a panic I couldn't control. How could he not see it? How could he be so blind? Mom, lower your voice, he hissed, glancing nervously back toward the party. You're being paranoid. He took the note from my hand and crumpled it into a ball. Isabel has a million things on her mind today. The catering for 200 people is complicated. It's a simple mistake. It's not a mistake, I insisted, my voice cracking. It's her. Don't you see how she is with him? How he's terrified of her. She hates him. Daniel. She hates him because he's Clara's son. The moment I said Clara's name, his face hardened. The brief warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar wall of resentment. This is what this is about, isn't it? He said, his voice dangerously low. You've never liked her because she's not Clara. You've been looking for a reason to hate her from day one, and now you're manufacturing one out of a misplaced catering note. You're so stuck in the past you can't stand to see me happy. His words were like slaps to the face, each one sharper than the last. That's not true, I whispered, the fight draining out of me. This is about protecting your son. No, he said, his eyes cold and unforgiving. This is about you trying to ruin my wedding day. Isabel loves Noah. She's a good woman, and she's my wife now. I need you to accept that. Go back to your table. Have some champagne. And please, for my sake, stop this. Stop looking for monsters where there aren't any. He tossed the crumpled note onto a nearby tray of empty glasses and walked away, leaving me alone in the shadows. A profound and terrible silence settled over me. He hadn't just dismissed me, he had chosen her over the safety of his own child. He had looked at concrete proof of a threat and explained it away with a flimsy excuse because the alternative, that his perfect new wife was a monster, was too unbearable to contemplate. The grief and desperation inside me hardened into something else. It was a cold, sharp resolve. He was blinded by love, or something that looked like it. He couldn't see the viper he had welcomed into his home. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was utterly alone in this fight. If my son wouldn't protect Noah, I would. I would do it myself, right here, right now, in front of all 200 of their guests. The loving mother-in-law was gone. The protector, the avenger, was all that was left. I walked out from behind the curtain, my son's dismissal echoing in my ears, fueling a righteous fire in my veins. The orchestra had just started playing a slow, romantic ballad. Daniel was on the dance floor, his arms wrapped around Isabel, his face buried in her neck. They looked like a porcelain figurine on a wedding cake. Perfect and untouchable, a wave of nausea washed over me. He was dancing with his son's would-be murderer. The other guests watched them with adoring smiles, oblivious to the venom coiled in the heart of the beautiful bride. My feet carried me past the smiling faces, past the tables laden with food and flowers, straight to the band leader. He was an older man with kind eyes, and he looked at me in surprise as I approached the stage. "Ma'am?" he asked into his microphone, the music still swelling around us. "I need to make an announcement," I said, my voice shockingly clear and loud. He hesitated, looking toward the happy couple on the dance floor. "Is it part of the plan?" "It is now," I said, taking the microphone from his stand. He wisely stepped back. A high-pitched screech of feedback cut through the music, and the dancing stopped. 200 heads turned in my direction. The room fell into a sudden, expectant silence. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, a mixture of confusion and anger. Isabel's perfect smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice amplified throughout the silent hall. "I'm Helen, the groom's mother. I know this is an unconventional time for a speech, but something has come to my attention that simply cannot wait until after the cake has been cut." I let the silence hang for a moment, drawing out the tension. I walked to the center of the dance floor, just a few feet from where Daniel and Isabel stood frozen. I retrieved the crumpled note from the tray where Daniel had discarded it, my movements deliberate and slow. I smoothed it out carefully. "I'd like to ask the bride a question," I said, my eyes locked on hers. Her face was a mask of pleasant confusion, but I could see a flicker of panic deep in her eyes. She knew. I held up the note for all to see. "Isabel, my dear, could you please explain this to our friends and family?" My voice was unnervingly calm. "It's a simple note, passed to the catering staff. It reads, 'Table 8, add shrimp to the child's portion. As you know, my grandson, Noah, the only child at Table 8, has a deadly shellfish allergy. An allergy we have discussed with you many, many times.'" A collective gasp went through the room. The whispers started, a ripple of shock and confusion spreading from table to table. Daniel's face went pale, the accusation finally dawning on him in its full public horror. I took a step closer to Isabel, my gaze unwavering. "So, my question is this. Isabel, was this a simple mistake? A careless oversight on the happiest day of your life? Or were you trying to ensure that my son's first marriage would be erased from this world for good, starting with the beautiful little boy it created?" The room was utterly still. Every eye was on the bride, the woman in white, whose picture-perfect smile had finally, completely vanished. She was no longer a porcelain doll. She was a cornered animal, and the hunter had just sprung the trap. For a moment that stretched into an eternity. Isabel just stared at me, her face a blank canvas. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a marble statue. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, her lower lip began to tremble. A single perfect tear traced a path down her flawless cheek. The performance of her life was about to begin. "Helen, how could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking with such authentic-sounding pain that even I felt a momentary flicker of doubt. She turned her wide, tear-filled eyes to Daniel, her hand fluttering to her chest as if to calm a broken heart. "Daniel, darling, what is she talking about? I would never—" Daniel, who had been frozen in shock, immediately snapped into protector mode. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close and glaring at me with pure fury. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" he snarled, his voice low but carrying in the dead silence of the room. Isabel buried her face in his tuxedo jacket, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't understand," she wailed, her voice muffled but audible to everyone. "Why would she say such a terrible thing? I love Noah. I love him like he's my own son. I was so careful with the caterers. I went over his allergy with them 3 times. She lifted her head, her face a mask of tragic betrayal. She looked out at the assembled guests, her eyes pleading for their understanding. "She's never liked me," Isabel said, her voice gaining strength. "From the day Daniel introduced us, she's seen me as a threat, the woman trying to replace his sainted Clara. She's tried to turn Daniel against me. She's tried to turn Noah against me. And now this. She's trying to ruin our wedding day with these insane, horrible lies." The tide of opinion in the room began to turn. I could feel it. Murmurs of sympathy for the weeping bride rippled through the crowd. People who had known me for years were now looking at me with suspicion and pity. The crazy old woman. The jealous mother-in-law who couldn't let go. Isabel was a master manipulator, and she was playing this crowd like a violin. The note is a misunderstanding, she cried, and looking at me with a pained expression. Perhaps a waiter wrote it down wrong. Perhaps it was for another table. To accuse me of trying to harm a child. It's monstrous. Then who wrote it? I pressed, my voice hard against the tide of her saccharine performance. I don't know, she shrieked, collapsing into fresh sobs. But it wasn't me. Daniel, please make her stop. I can't take this. Daniel held her tighter, his face a thunderous mask of rage directed entirely at me. That's enough, Mom. You've made a scene. You've embarrassed this family, and you have humiliated my wife. I think you should leave. His words hit me like a physical blow. He was casting me out. He believed her. He was choosing the monster over his own mother, over the truth. Desperation clawed at my throat. I had played my hand, and it seemed I had lost. Isabel, seeing her victory, allowed a tiny, triumphant smirk to touch her lips for a nanosecond before she hid her face again in Daniel's chest. She had outplayed me. She was going to get away with it. The guests were all on her side. My own son was against me, and the truth was about to be buried under an avalanche of perfectly performed tears. Just as Daniel was about to escort me from the hall, a movement from the side caught my eye. It was Sophie, my adopted daughter, the quiet one, the observer. For years, she'd been a silent pillar of support for our family, stepping in to care for Noah after Clara's death, loving him with a fierce, unassuming devotion that both Daniel and I had taken for granted. She was the maid of honor, and she had been standing by the head table, her face pale and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Isabel, still nestled in Daniel's arms, looked up and caught Sophie's eye. She offered a small, pathetic smile, as if seeking an ally. Sophie, you know I would never hurt him, don't you? She whimpered. Sophie's expression was unreadable. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and then another. She walked directly up to the bride and groom, her bridesmaid's dress swishing around her ankles. The room held its breath, expecting words of comfort, a defense of the weeping bride. Instead, Sophie raised her hand and slapped Isabel across the face. The crack of the impact was sharp and loud, a gunshot in the silent room. Gasps of shock erupted from the guests. Isabel stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her face a mask of utter astonishment. The victim act evaporated in an instant, replaced by a flash of pure, venomous rage. Her eyes, no longer filled with crocodile tears, narrowed into hateful slits. The mask had slipped. "How dare you!" Isabel shrieked, her voice losing its whispery sweetness and becoming a harsh, ugly thing. "You're a liar," Sophie said, her voice low and trembling with a fury I had never seen in her before. "I've watched you. I've seen the way you look at Noah when you think no one is watching, the way you flinch from his touch. Helen is right. You're a monster." Daniel was stunned into inaction, his head whipping back and forth between his wife and his adopted sister, as if he couldn't process what was happening. Isabel, realizing her mistake, tried to regain control, her face crumpling back into a mask of pain. "She hit me! Daniel, she hit me!" But the slap had done more than just shock the room. It had shattered the carefully constructed illusion Isabel had built. It was an act of such raw, uncalculated defiance that it broke the spell she had cast over everyone, and it pushed one person in the room past their breaking point. From a table near the back, a choked sob erupted. It was Isabel's younger sister, Chloe, a nervous, mousy girl who had served as a bridesmaid. All eyes swiveled to her. Her face was ashen, her body racked with tremors. She was staring at her sister, her expression one of pure terror and guilt. "Chloe?" Isabel said, her voice a sharp warning hiss. "Don't." But it was too late. The dam of lies had been broken, first by my accusation, then by Sophie's slap. Now, the flood was coming. Chloe's terrified. Guilty eyes met mine across the room, and I knew. The second witness, the one I never could have planned for, was about to speak the truth. Chloe pushed her chair back with a screech that echoed in the tomb-like silence of the hall. She stood up, her bridesmaid's bouquet tumbling from her lap and scattering white rose petals across the floor. Tears were streaming down her face, her mascara running in black rivulets. She looked like a frightened child. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't do this. Chloe, sit down," Isabel commanded, her voice low and menacing. The sweet bride was gone, replaced by a cold, cruel dictator. The shift was so jarring that a murmur of unease rippled through the guests. They were seeing the real Isabel for the first time. But Chloe shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "No, I won't. What you did was wrong. Izzy, it was evil." She stumbled forward, away from her table, her gaze fixed on her sister. "She made me do it," Chloe cried out, her voice gaining strength with every word, now addressing the entire room. "She came to me this morning, before the ceremony. She had the note already written. Every person in the room was frozen, their attention riveted on the hysterical young woman. Daniel slowly released Isabel, taking an unconscious step away from her as if she were suddenly radioactive. His face was a canvas of dawning horror and disbelief. Chloe pointed a trembling finger at her sister. She said it was the only way, that Noah was a problem, that he was always going to be between her and Daniel, a ghost of his first wife. She said that if he were gone, if there was a tragic accident, then she and Daniel could finally have a fresh start, a family of their own. The ugly words hung in the air, poisoning the atmosphere of celebration. "She's lying," Isabel shrieked, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a friendly face, an ally, and finding none. "She's always been jealous of me. She's making it all up." "No, I'm not," Chloe sobbed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "She told me what to do. She told me to wait until everyone was seated and then slip the note to one of the waiters, to tell him it was a last-minute change from the bride. She chose me because she knew no one would suspect me. I didn't want to do it, I swear I didn't. But she knows things about me, secrets. She threatened to ruin my life if I didn't help her." The confession, raw and terrified, washed away every last vestige of doubt in the room. This wasn't a performance. This was the gut-wrenching, ugly truth erupting into the light. The sisters' tears had done what my accusation and Sophie's anger could not. They had utterly and completely damned Isabel. I looked at my son. His face had crumpled. The denial, the anger, the blind love, it all disintegrated in the face of this irrefutable, horrifying confession. He looked at Isabel, truly looked at her, and finally saw the monster I had been trying to show him all along. The woman he had just pledged his life to was capable of murdering his child. The love in his eyes died, replaced by a look of such profound disgust and betrayal that it was chilling to behold. Isabel stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, her white dress looking like a shroud. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had snapped shut, and her own sister's testimony had been the final, brutal blow. The silence that followed Chloe's confession was heavier than any sound. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of shared horror. Then, Daniel moved. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He walked towards Isabel with a terrifyingly calm demeanor, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. "Get out," he said. His voice was not his own. It was a hollow, dead thing, stripped of all warmth and emotion. Isabel's face contorted with desperation. "Daniel, baby, she's lying. "You can't believe her over me," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. He flinched back as if her touch would burn him. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping to a guttural growl, "get out of my house." The spell was broken. Isabel's parents, who had been sitting in stunned silence at the head table, rushed forward. Her father, a man with a politician's smile, tried to intervene. "Now, Daniel, let's not be hasty. There's obviously been a terrible misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Daniel bit out, his eyes never leaving Isabel's, "was that I ever thought she was human." The dam of civility finally broke. Shouts of "monster" and "how could you" erupted from the guests. The room transformed from a wedding reception into a hostile tribunal. Isabel, seeing that she had lost everything, Daniel, the crowd, her future, finally dropped all pretense. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Fine," she screamed, her voice a venomous shriek. "Fine, I hope you're all happy. He never would have loved me completely with that little brat in the way. He was always going to be Clara's son, not mine." The raw, ugly truth of her motives, spoken aloud by her own lips, was the final nail in her coffin. A wave of revulsion went through the room. People began to stand up, turning their backs on her. Sophie had already gone to Noah, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide, terrified eyes from the doorway where a babysitter had been keeping him. She scooped him up, shielding his face and carrying him away from the poison his stepmother was spewing. Isabel's father grabbed her arm, his face purple with shame and fury, and began dragging her toward the exit. She fought him, a wild, cornered thing. "You'll regret this, Daniel," she shrieked over her shoulder. "You'll be miserable without me." And then she was gone. The doors swung shut behind her, cutting off her final curses. A profound and awkward silence fell once more. The wedding was over. The beautiful cake stood untouched, a monument to a catastrophic lie. The champagne flutes were still full. The orchestra had packed up their instruments and slipped away unnoticed. My son, Daniel, stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume. He looked around at the wreckage of his wedding, at the horrified faces of his friends and family, and then his eyes found mine. He took a staggering step towards me, his strong shoulders slumping. He looked like a little boy again, lost and broken. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his face crumpled, and a single, agonizing sob escaped his lips. He fell to his knees, right there in the center of the room, and buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with the full, devastating weight of his mistake. The party was over. Now, the long and painful work of cleaning up the ashes could begin. The weeks that followed the ruined wedding were quiet and gray. The grand house that Isabel had scrubbed clean of all warmth now felt like a mausoleum. Daniel moved through it like a ghost, his shame and guilt a palpable presence in every room. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a monotone. He had put his son in the path of a monster, and he had vilified me for trying to protect him. The weight of that knowledge was crushing him. We didn't talk about what happened, not at first. The wound was too raw, the betrayal too deep. Instead, we communicated through actions. I would come over every day to make sure the two of them were eating. I'd find Daniel staring blankly at a wall, and I would just sit with him. The silence, a shared language of grief. The legal proceedings to annul the marriage were swift and ugly, a blizzard of paperwork that formally erased the brief, catastrophic union. Through it all, Sophie was our anchor. She had moved back into the main house temporarily, sensing that Daniel and Noah needed her. She didn't offer platitudes or demand apologies. She simply filled the empty spaces with a quiet, steady competence. She was the one who could coax Noah out from under his bed when the nightmares came. She was the one who remembered that he liked his sandwiches cut into triangles, a small detail of love that had been lost in Isabel's sterile regime. She brought life back into the house, bit by bit. One afternoon, I found her in the backyard, on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds from the overgrown flower beds that had been Clara's pride and joy. Isabel had neglected them, planning to rip them out and replace them with manicured, soulless shrubs. Sophie was carefully tending to the surviving perennials, her hands covered in soil. It was a callback to a happier time, a gentle act of restoration. Daniel came to stand at the window, watching her. He had a mug of coffee in his hands, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of something other than pain in his eyes. It was a dawning awareness. He was seeing Sophie, perhaps for the first time, not as the quiet, reliable girl who was always just there, but as the woman who had held his family together when he had nearly allowed it to be destroyed. She was the one who had slapped the truth out into the open. She was the one who shielded his son. She was the one now tending to his late wife's garden. Later that evening, as Sophie was tucking Noah into bed, I heard Daniel speak to her in the hallway. His voice was thick with emotion. "Sophie," he said, and she stopped. I never thanked you for what you did. You were brave, braver than I was. I did it for Noah," she replied softly. "I love him." "I know," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I know you do. I've been so blind." It was the beginning, the first real words of healing spoken in that house of wreckage. As I listened from the living room, a fragile sense of hope began to bloom in my chest. The trauma had been immense, the deceit catastrophic. But in the ruins of the life Daniel had tried to build with a viper, something true and good was being given the space to grow. We were rebuilding from the wreckage, and the foundation, I realized, was the quiet, unassuming strength of the woman who had always been there, loving them all along. The changing of seasons mirrored the slow healing of our family. The gray silence of winter gave way to the tentative green of spring. Daniel began to emerge from the fog of his grief and shame. He started talking again, first about small things, then about the big ones. One evening, he sat with me on the porch, the one place that still felt like it belonged to Clara, and he finally apologized. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it hurt to look at. "You were right about everything. I let my own loneliness and my desire for a perfect picture blind me to the monster she was. I didn't listen to you. I didn't protect my own son. I'll never forgive myself for that." "You can," I told him, taking his hand. "You can by being the father he needs now, by building a life that is safe and true." And that's what he did. His focus shifted entirely to Noah. They went to therapy together, working through the trauma and fear that Isabel had instilled in the little boy. Slowly, painstakingly. Noah's laughter began to return to the house. The sound was like rain after a long drought. Throughout this time, Sophie remained a constant, gentle presence. Her relationship with Daniel evolved naturally, without fanfare. It wasn't a whirlwind romance born of passion, but a deep, quiet love built on a foundation of shared history, mutual respect, and an unwavering devotion to Noah. They fell in love over scraped knees, bedtime stories, and shared glances across a dinner table. It was real and solid in a way his relationship with Isabel had only ever pretended to be. I knew things had truly changed the day I arrived to find the three of them in the backyard. Daniel was pushing Noah on the swing, pushing him higher and higher, and Noah's shrieks of delight were pure, unadulterated joy. Sophie was kneeling in Clara's restored garden, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, pointing out the blooming lilies of the valley, Clara's favorite flower. There was an ease between them, a sense of rightness that settled deep in my bones. Daniel caught my eye and smiled, a genuine, happy smile that I hadn't seen in years. It was the smile he used to have when Clara was alive. He had found his way back, not by replacing what he had lost, but by finally opening his eyes to the love that had been right in front of him all along. He hadn't found happiness with the beautiful, poisonous viper he'd brought into our lives, but with the woman who had loved his son as her own, the woman who had tended his late wife's garden, the woman who had bravely slapped a monster to protect her family. He had found his home in an unexpected love, a love that was not a perfect picture, but a messy, beautiful, and resilient truth. And as I watched my grandson fly through the air, safe and cherished between the two people who loved him most, I finally felt at peace. The storms, when they come, can feel like they will last forever. They rip away the branches, flood the foundations, and leave you shivering in the wreckage. For a long time, I thought our family was part of that wreckage, broken beyond repair by a calculated act of evil. But the aftermath of a storm is also quiet. It's in that quiet that you can finally hear what matters. See what's still standing. What stood for us was a love that had been there all along, patient and true. The villain of our story did not win. Her legacy is not one of destruction, but of revelation. She was the fire that burned away the lies, leaving behind a scarred but stronger foundation on which we could rebuild. My son learned that true partnership isn't about a perfect facade. It's about having someone in the trenches with you, fighting for what you love. My grandson learned that he is protected, fiercely and completely. And I learned that a mother's instinct is the truest compass you will ever have. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about survival, healing, and the profound peace of watching your family find its way back to the light. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that everyone else dismissed? What does the idea of a perfect family mean to you? And what are the dangers of chasing that image? Let me know in the comments below. Oro a zero. I was sitting quietly at the table next to my 7-year-old grandson at my son's second wedding. Suddenly, the boy grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Grandma." "I want to leave right now," I asked him. "What's wrong?" He trembled and replied, "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" I slowly lowered my gaze and froze. I took my grandson's hand and we got up in silence. "I'm so glad you're here." Shiuaro.26. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I was sitting in the middle of the wedding hall, a ballroom aglow with candlelight, right next to my little grandson, the boy I love more than life itself. 048. Today was the wedding of my son, Alex, to his second wife, Ava. My little boy, Leo, was busy pushing his red toy car back and forth across the immaculate white tablecloth. His clear eyes seemed immersed in a world of his own, where the noise of the adults around him didn't exist. 0108. I looked at him, and my heart softened. I carefully straightened the tiny bow tie at his neck, a gesture as gentle as if I were caressing the memory of his mother, Maria, whose every tender smile I still remember as if it were yesterday. 126. The soft melody of the jazz band filled the room, blending with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of wine glasses. The ballroom was decorated with impressive luxury with arrangements of pristine white roses on every table, and the candlelight reflected on the gleaming silver plates. I looked up, searching for Alex. He was busy going from table to table, toasting to thank the guests with a radiant smile that seemed to want to hide the emptiness I knew he still carried in his heart since Maria left. 1:55, in the distance, Ava, my son's new wife, stunning in her beaded wedding dress, posed for photos with her friends. Her smile was perfect, without a single cloud, as if the whole world belonged to her. I looked at her and felt something strange in my chest, a weird sensation, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. 20. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, serving more wine, clearing empty plates, and arranging the napkins. An elderly couple sitting at our table turned to me with a kind smile. How fast Leo is growing up. How old is he now? Betty? I smiled and replied in a soft voice. He just turned 7. Time flies. Then I turned to cut a small piece of cake to give to Leo. 02:46. The boy looked up, his eyes shining with gratitude, but he immediately lowered his head again and continued pushing his toy car as if only that toy was the place where he felt safe. Suddenly, Leo stopped. His little hands stopped pushing the car, and his round eyes looked at me with a seriousness that was not normal for him. I was a little startled. 03:06. A bad feeling ran through my body. He grabbed my hand tightly. His little fingers were ice cold. In an urgent voice, he whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." His voice trembled as if he were holding back a fear he couldn't explain. My heart raced. I leaned over him and put a hand on his shoulder. 03:24. "What's wrong, my boy? Tell me what it is." Leo shuddered, pressing his lips together. And then he whispered so softly that I had to lean my ear closer to hear him. "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that went through my chest. A terrible anguish began to grow inside me, making it hard to breathe. 03:47. I tried to stay calm and stroked his hair, but his gaze, the panicked look of a boy of just 7, prevented me from ignoring it. "It's okay, my love. Let your grandma look," I said, trying to make my voice sound calm to soothe him, although I felt my own heart was pounding. Carefully, I lifted the edge of the white tablecloth and looked into the dark space under the table, where the wooden legs of the chairs and Leo's little shoes were swinging. And then I saw it. 04:20. A small piece of paper folded in 4, lying there right next to Leo's chair. It was so small that it was almost lost in the darkness, but its presence chilled my blood. Leo huddled against me, his little hand gripping my arm as if seeking refuge. I felt his agitated breathing. Every tremor seemed to tell me that something was very wrong. I crouched down completely, and with a trembling hand, I picked up the paper. 04:46. The people around us were still laughing and toasting, but at that instant my entire world shrank until it was just me, Leo, and that damned paper in my hand. I unfolded it. The dim candlelight on the table was enough to read the scribbled words. Table 8. Add shrimp to the child's serving. A few words, but they were like a direct punch to my heart. 05:15. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins and the air get stuck in my chest. Leo is severely allergic to shrimp, something my whole family knows perfectly well. A single piece of shrimp would be enough to put his life in danger. Who could have written this? Who could be so cruel? Right on my son's wedding day. I squeezed Leo's hand, feeling his little fingers tremble in mine. 05:40. I stood up abruptly, not caring about the surprised looks from the people around me. The elderly couple nearby stopped talking and looked at me with concern. I hugged Leo with all my strength, as if I feared he would vanish if I let him go. The laughter and music continued, but for me, everything had become a heavy, suffocating silence. Memories of other times flooded my mind, taking me out of that gleaming wedding hall and back to the years when our family was whole. I once thought my son's home would always be filled with laughter, 06:13. But life, like a sudden gust of wind, extinguished that flame of happiness, leaving me with scars that would never heal. I remember Maria, my first daughter-in-law, like I remember the morning sunlight streaming through the window at dawn. Her smile was tender and warm. She always made me feel like I was in the arms of a true daughter. 06:33. Maria never raised her voice, never did anything that worried me. She was one of those people who just by looking at them made you feel at peace. I still remember those very windy afternoons in the suburbs of Phoenix when I would arrive at Alex and Maria's little house. 06:55. The laughter of Leo, who had just started to walk, echoed in the backyard as he chased a colorful rubber ball. Maria would be on the porch with a basket of freshly picked vegetables, smiling as she watched her son. "Mom, Betty, try the chili I made. See what you think," she would often say to me, her voice full of pride as she placed the warm bowl in front of me. So 7:17, I would sit there eating and talking with her about simple things while Leo crawled on the floor clinging to an old toy car. But the most beautiful and also the most painful memory is the night Leo became very sick. He had a very high fever. His little body burned and his eyes could barely open with no strength left, even to cry. Maria held him while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "Mom." 7:43. "Betty, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat next to her, taking turns to place damp cloths on his forehead, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, honey. The boy is strong. He's going to be okay." But inside, the worry weighed on me like a stone. So 08:08. I stayed up with Maria until dawn, when the first rays of sun appeared and Leo's fever finally broke, and he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Maria turned to me, her eyes red, but with a faint smile. "Thank you, Mom. Without you, I don't know what I would have done at that moment." I just took her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if I wanted to tell her that I would always be there for her and for Leo. 08:31. I thought that this little family would be happy forever, like a song that never ends. But then, one fateful afternoon, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The cold voice of a police officer came through the line. "Mrs. Williams, we regret to inform you that there has been an accident." I don't remember how I finished hearing the sentence. 08:57. I just know that my hands were shaking so much that I dropped a plate on the floor and it shattered. Maria was gone in an instant when a truck that lost control hit her car on the highway outside the city. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the world crumble in front of me. Maria's funeral was on a day of torrential rain. 09:15. The drops fell nonstop as if the sky was also crying for her. Leo, who was only 4 years old then, was in my arms, confused, looking at everyone with his innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. "Grandma, where's my mommy?" he asked in his little voice. I hugged him tightly, swallowing my tears, and whispered, "Your mommy is in a very beautiful place. My love." But inside I felt shattered. 9:42. Alex, my son, collapsed in front of the coffin, his shoulders shaking, and he couldn't say a word. I knew he was trying to be strong, but his gaze was empty, as if a part of his soul had gone with Maria. After that tragedy, Alex changed completely. He buried himself in work. 10:01. He would leave home very early and wouldn't return until Leo was already asleep. I understood that he was running away, trying to fill that immense void in his heart with endless days of work. But Leo, my poor boy, suffered the most. He started talking less. His gaze was often sad, as if he was waiting for a miracle that would bring his mother back. I became his only support. 10:21. I took him to school every morning and sat by his bed every night to rock him. "Grandma, tell me a story about my mommy," he would often ask me, and I would tell them to him in a choked voice, talking about the times Maria sang to him to sleep, how she cut his fruit into little pieces to make him his favorite dessert. 10:42. Each story was an attempt to keep Maria's image alive in Leo's mind and in my heart. Lucy, my adopted daughter, also became an essential part of those days. With her warm heart and skilled hands, she would come to the house often, bringing coloring books or cookies she had baked herself. Lucy loved Leo as if he were her own little brother. 11:09. She would carry him, teach him to read, or sit for hours with him at the table to help him with his clumsy drawings. "Look, Leo, your house turned out prettier than mine," she would say, laughing in her voice as clear as a bell. But sometimes I would catch Lucy looking at Alex when he entered the house in silence after a long day of work. It was a deep look that contained something more than a simple sibling affection. 11:33. I saw it, but I decided not to say anything. Maybe I was afraid that if I brought up the subject, I would break the fragile stability of what was left of our family. Alex's house slowly became devoid of laughter. But thanks to Lucy and Leo, the family flame remained lit, even if it was weakly. I did everything possible to keep that flame from going out. 11:57. But in the depths of my heart, I knew that both Alex and I lived with wounds that had never healed. Every time I saw Leo sleeping, I saw Maria's features on his little face, and my heart would ache again. The memory of that afternoon is still as clear in my mind as if time had not passed. 12:16. I was sitting in my small living room listening to the sparrows singing in the yard with a heart full of mixed feelings. It was the first time my son Alex was bringing Ava home to introduce her. I tried to open my heart. I tried to see this young woman through the eyes of a mother who wants her son to find happiness again after so much pain. 12:36. But deep down, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease like a cold wind that made me shiver. That afternoon, Alex arrived later than usual. I was in the kitchen preparing the tacos that Leo loves so much when I heard the door open. Alex came in with a strange glow on his face. 12:56. His eyes lit up as they were in his youth when he used to talk about Maria with a passion he couldn't hide. "Mom," he said in a choked voice, leaning against the doorframe, "I want you to meet someone." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, feeling a bit of nervousness. "Someone special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Alex smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. 13:20. "Yes, you're going to like her very much," he said, full of confidence. I nodded. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to hide the worry that was starting to grow in me. After Maria, I wasn't sure anyone could fill the void she left, not only for Alex, but also for Leo and for me. That night, Ava appeared. 13:46. She entered my house in an elegant, light blue dress, her hair perfectly styled in waves that framed her face, and her lips painted a soft red that curved into a smile. That smile, I must admit, was charming, as if she had rehearsed it to please anyone. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Williams," she said in a sweet voice, bowing her head slightly. I returned her smile, invited her in, and served her a cup of hot aromatic coffee. 14:11. "Your house is so cozy," Ava said as her eyes scanned the family photos hanging on the wall where there was one of Maria hugging a very tiny Leo. I nodded and thanked her, but her eyes lingered on that photo longer than I would have liked, and I wasn't sure if I liked that. Dinner went on in an atmosphere that I tried to make as friendly as possible. 14:34. I placed the dishes I had prepared all afternoon on the table. Tacos wrapped in corn tortillas, a plate of enchiladas with red sauce, and a fresh salad with mango. Leo's favorite dish. Alex sat next to Ava, his eyes never leaving her. His happiness was visible in every gesture. "Mom, Ava works in marketing at my company." 14:58. "She's very good at what she does," he said, his voice full of pride. Ava smiled. She served me an enchilada with a delicate but calculated movement. "Mrs. Williams, this is delicious. You have to teach me how to make it," she said, giving me a friendly look. I smiled and responded politely, but a small part of me remained uneasy. 15:22. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she laughed, that made me feel like I was watching a very well-staged play. Leo, my grandson, was sitting at the head of the table, strangely quiet. He, who normally wouldn't stop talking about school that night, just picked at his food without lifting his head once. I noticed that he was avoiding Ava's gaze as if he was trying to hide in a safe corner. 15:44. Ava leaned over, took a chocolate bar from her purse, and placed it in front of Leo with a radiant smile. "This is for you. It's very good, Leo," she said in a voice as sweet as if she were trying to win him over. But Leo remained still, his little hands gripping his silverware, and then he simply turned his face away without touching the chocolate. I saw a flash of fear in his eyes and felt as if my heart would shrink. 16:14. Alex frowned, about to scold his son. "Leo, what's wrong with you? Ava is giving you some candy." I quickly intervened. "It's nothing. He's probably a little tired. Leave him be, son." Alex sighed, but didn't say anything else and turned to serve Ava more wine as if he wanted to lighten the mood. Lucy, my adopted daughter, was also at dinner. 16:39. She sat across from me, eating in silence. But I noticed how her gaze darkened when Ava took Alex's hand under the table. Lucy has always been a very sensitive girl, and I know she loves Alex like a brother. But sometimes I wonder if that feeling isn't deeper. When Ava took Alex's hand, Lucy's hand stopped over her glass, and I saw her fingers tighten a little. She didn't say anything. In 17 Yeo. She just lowered her head and continued eating. But that silence was heavier than any words. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to understand what was making her sad, but I knew it wasn't the right time. After dinner, Ava insisted on washing the dishes, even though I refused several times. "Mrs. Williams, let me you rest," she said with overflowing enthusiasm. 17:29. I reluctantly agreed and watched her go into the kitchen, roll up her sleeves, and hum a cheerful tune while she cleaned. I must admit that she did everything impeccably. The dishes were neatly stacked, and the sink was sparkling. For a moment, I thought, this girl seems very caring. But then, when I went out into the living room, I saw Leo sitting, coloring with his little hands clutching a crayon. 17:50. Ava approached and sat down next to him, praising him. "You draw so well." "Leo? What is it?" "Let me see." But Leo immediately let go of the pencil and leaned back with an expression of distrust, as if she were a threat. Ava glanced at me and quickly forced a smile, as if to cover up the awkward moment. "What a shy boy," she said in the same sweet voice. But I saw something strange flash in her eyes. 18:19. Alex, meanwhile, didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. He was busy serving more wine, telling funny anecdotes from work, and laughing loudly every time Ava told a joke. The introduction ended with my son completely satisfied, seeing Ava off at the door with his eyes fixed on her as if there was no one else in the world. I stood there watching them walk away with a strange feeling in my heart, as if something wasn't quite right. 1844. Time passed, and Ava gradually became a part of our lives. One weekend morning, with the bright California sun flooding the living room through the windows, I was knitting a scarf when Ava appeared, smiling from ear to ear. "Mrs. Williams, I want to take Leo to the park today. Is that okay?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. 1908. I looked at Leo, who was on the floor playing with his wooden blocks, his face expressionless. "Of course. I'm sure he'd love it," I replied, forcing a smile, even though I felt a little doubt inside. Alex had gone to work, and I thought maybe a little fresh air would do Leo good. 1927. Ava took Leo's hand and led him toward the door while I watched them go with a strange heaviness in my heart. When they returned, Ava came in with a triumphant smile. He had so much fun. He wouldn't stop going down the slide, and he even asked for another ice cream. She recounted, her voice full of excitement. 1947. But when I looked at Leo, I saw that his shirt was dirty with some dried dirt stains on the blue fabric that I had ironed myself that morning. He was silent with his toy car in his hand without saying a word about his outing. "Did you have fun, my boy?" I asked, crouching down to stroke his hair. He just nodded slightly, looking away. 2009. I wanted to ask him more to know why he was so quiet, but Ava intervened with her always sweet voice. "I already told you. Mrs. Williams. He loved it." I nodded, but inside me, a small piece of the puzzle of doubt began to form. On another occasion, while Alex was at work, Ava showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen preparing chili for lunch when I heard her talking to Leo in the living room. 2034. At first, her voice was soft, but suddenly I heard a harsh phrase. "Stay still, Leo, don't make a mess. You're a big boy now, but you still act like a baby." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hands still over the onion I was chopping, and a chill ran through my body. I came out of the kitchen, and instantly Ava changed her tone, becoming as sweet as if nothing had happened. "Our Leo is so clever. You 2102, look at the tall tower he built," she said, pointing to the wooden blocks the boy was playing with a radiant smile. But Leo just pressed his lips together and looked at me as if asking for help. I tried to smile and said, "Yes, he's very skilled," but inside the unease was starting to grow, like a small thorn digging into my heart. I tried to calm myself. 2126. Surely she's not used to children. Anyone is a bit clumsy at first. Leo's 7th birthday is a memory I will never forget. Lucy, my adopted daughter, spent all morning baking a chocolate cake, Leo's favorite. When she arrived with the cake and placed it on the table with its candles lit, Leo shouted with joy. His eyes lit up for the first time in months. 2151. "Aunt Lucy, this is my favorite cake," he exclaimed, running to hug her. She smiled, stroked his hair, and told him tenderly, "I made it for you, my love. Eat a lot." I watched them with a warm heart, feeling that the family flame was rekindled. Ava was also there, but she only clapped in a forced way, standing in a corner with a weary smile. 2216. Her only gift for Leo was an indifferent pat on the shoulder and a happy birthday champ. I saw how Leo shrank a little, avoiding her gaze, and my heart ached again. I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet, telling myself not to get too involved. Another time, Alex took Ava and Leo to the grocery store, 2239. I stayed home, but when they returned, I heard Ava complaining in an irritated tone. Leo dropped a whole bag of candy at the checkout, and I had to pay for it. What a clumsy boy. Alex frowned and turned to scold his son. Leo, you're a big boy now. You have to be more careful. I saw Leo lower his head with his hands intertwined, and his eyes sought mine as if asking for help. 2302. I quickly approached and put a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, my boy. It was just some candy. But inside, I couldn't stop wondering why Ava got so angry so easily with a child. Why couldn't she be as gentle as Maria had been? One afternoon when I went to pick up Leo from school, his teacher took me aside and said in a low but concerned voice, Mrs. 2330, Williams, lately Leo has been talking less and seems very withdrawn. Is something happening at home? I froze, but I tried to downplay it. I'm sure it's just the changes. Mrs. Davis, don't worry, but on the way home, Leo tugged on my blouse and said in a trembling voice, Grandma, I don't want to go home with Miss Ava, 2355. I stopped and knelt down to look into his clear eyes, my heart feeling squeezed. Why do you say that, my love? Miss Ava loves you, I said. But as soon as I said it, I knew I was wrong. Leo shook his head with firm determination in his gaze. No, Grandma, she doesn't love me. I stroked his hair, trying to calm him, but inside I couldn't deny that the boy was telling the truth. Lucy, who was nearby, had heard everything. 2424. She turned away in silence, but I saw how her shoulders moved slightly, as if she were holding back a sigh. All those loose pieces, all those little signs. I had seen them, but I had chosen to ignore them. And so the day of my son's wedding arrived. That afternoon, the golden sun of Florida streamed through the large windows, bathing the ballroom in a radiant light, as if wanting to celebrate my son's happy day. 2456. I was sitting at table number 8 next to my grandson, Leo and Lucy, my adopted daughter. Leo was playing with his red toy car, whispering a soft vroom vroom. I looked at him, and my heart filled with tenderness. Lucy, in a simple beige dress, was sitting on the other side, leaning over from time to time to say something in Leo's ear with a smile as sweet as the morning sun. 2518. Eat another little piece of bread. My boy, she said, breaking off a small piece for him. I smiled at the sight, feeling a little comfort in my heart. Although our family had gone through so much pain, the presence of Lucy and Leo was always the fire that warmed my soul. Alex, my son, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, was walking between the tables, toasting with relatives. His face was overflowing with happiness. 2543. His radiant smile seemed to want to erase the dark years that followed Maria's death. I looked at him, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. I wanted to believe that he had found a new happiness, that Ava, the dazzling bride in her beaded wedding dress, would give him a new home. 2603. But every time my gaze met Ava's, who was laughing loudly in front of the cameras, never letting go of her wine glass, I felt a small thorn digging into my heart. Her smile was too perfect, like a carefully placed mask. The soft melody of the jazz band played, blending with the lively conversations of the guests. 2623. The waiters moved discreetly, serving appetizers, crispy crackers, an aromatic cheese dip, and plates of fresh shrimp elegantly decorated. I noticed that Leo only took a cracker and then carefully pushed the shrimp plate away. I frowned and asked him in a low voice, "Don't you like this, my love?" The boy shook his head, looking away as if he were hiding something. 2646. I wanted to ask him more, but a close relative interrupted, saying cheerfully, "And Leo is behaving well, Betty. Look how big he's gotten." I smiled and replied, He's a smart little man now, but inside, I couldn't help but worry. Leo had never refused food in such a strange way. In the distance, I saw Ava's gaze turn to our table, 2712. The smile on her lips seemed to tighten for a second, just enough for no one to notice before she turned to continue toasting with another guest. I tried to dismiss my uneasiness, telling myself I was overthinking. But then everything changed in an instant. Leo, who was still playing with his toy car, pushed it too hard, and the toy rolled onto the floor. The boy quickly crouched down to pick it up, but I saw him freeze, his eyes wide, fixed on something under the table. 2739. I leaned over to ask him what was wrong when Leo pulled out a small piece of paper folded in 4 with trembling hands and a pale face. He immediately clung to my hand and whispered urgently, "Grandma, let's go. Please, let's go now." My heart started pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. "What's wrong? My boy?" I asked, trying to stay calm. 2803. But Leo's panicked look prevented me from doing so. Trembling, he repeated that question that chilled my blood. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that paralyzed me. I crouched down, lifted the white tablecloth, and my eyes scanned the dark space under the table. 2821. The little paper was lying next to his chair, a harmless object but full of menace. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the world shrink around me, leaving only Leo, me, and that damned paper. I unfolded it. The candlelight was enough to read the scribbled words, "Table, add shrimp to the child serving." A few words, but they were like an electric shock that ran through my entire body. 2847. I subconsciously crumpled the paper in my hand. The music, the laughter, everything around me seemed to sink into an abyss from which I couldn't escape. Ava, in her dazzling wedding dress, continued to laugh in a corner of the ballroom, raising her glass to toast with a guest, as if nothing in the world could worry her. 2910. Alex was busy taking photos with his coworkers with a radiant smile that seemed to confirm that this was the happiest day of his life. But for me, everything in that ballroom was a farce, a curtain that hid the terrible truth I had just discovered. I squeezed the paper tightly, feeling it burn my skin. Leo, the grandson I loved more than my own life, had almost become the victim of an evil plot, right on his father's wedding day. I turned to Lucy, my adopted daughter, who was sitting next to Leo. 2941. Her eyes were filled with concern when she saw my expression. "Take care of Leo, please," I said, trying to stay calm, although I knew I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. Lucy nodded, pulling Leo closer to her and hugging him tightly like a protective shield. "Where are you going?" she asked me in a low voice, but full of anguish. I just shook my head without answering because I didn't even know what I was going to do next. 3007. I quickly went out into the hallway, my legs heavy, as if they were carrying lead, but with my heart pounding, urging me to act. Near the bar, I saw a group of waiters chatting. Their laughter sounded like a painful contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. 3027. I recognized David, the young man who had brought the food to our table several times. He had a kind face and a friendly smile, but at that moment, I couldn't think about that. I walked straight up to him, put the paper in his face, and asked in a firm voice, "Do you know who sent this paper?" David looked at the paper and his face changed instantly. His carefree smile turned into an expression of panic. 3053. "My God, this is my paper," he stammered, his hands trembling as if he wanted to snatch it from me. "A woman gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray." His words were like a ray of light in the midst of confusion, But they also agitated me even more. "Who gave it to you?" I insisted, almost shouting, completely losing my composure. David took a step back, confused. "I don't know her name, ma'am." 3119. "She just told me to give it to the chef. The paper didn't say who sent it." Rage exploded inside me like a burning fire. "All the more reason," I said, getting closer, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "You know, my grandson is severely allergic to shrimp. A single piece could kill him." 3143. David turned pale, his eyes wide with horror, and shook his head frantically. "Ma'am, I really didn't know. I just followed the note. I had no idea about anything." His voice broke as if he too was trapped in this nightmare. The other waiters began to whisper among themselves, looking at each other with curiosity and concern. 3207. I squeezed the paper in my hand, feeling it burn my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything. But I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. Leo was waiting for me, and I had to protect him. From inside the ballroom, the embassy's voice cheerfully announced that they should get ready for the main course. 3232. His voice was like a cruel reminder that time was running out, and if I hesitated, a deadly trap could be waiting for Leo. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in my body. I knew I couldn't stay silent. If I didn't act right now, I would never forgive myself. I returned to the ballroom with the paper still in my hand as irrefutable proof of a sinister plan. The ballroom was still flooded with candlelight, and the music of the jazz band mixed with the laughter of the guests. 3257. The waiters silently served the main courses, and the aroma of roasted meat and gravy filled the air. But for me, everything was a farce. I looked at Leo, huddled next to Lucy, his clear eyes full of fear fixed on me as if I were his only refuge in the middle of the storm. I took Leo's little hand, feeling his trembling fingers in my palm. 3320. And then, as if driven by an invisible force, I stood up abruptly. My voice resonated clearly and firmly above the music and conversations. "One moment, please. Before we begin to eat, I have something to clarify." The whole ballroom fell silent as if time had stopped. All eyes were on table 8, where I was standing with Leo by my side, and Lucy sitting with a spark of determination in her eyes. 3345. The clinking of glasses ceased. The murmurs died down, and I could only hear the pounding of my heart in my chest. I held up the paper. The words scribbled on it were an undeniable accusation. "Who wrote this paper asking for shrimp to be added to the food of the child at table 8? I asked, my voice trembling with indignation, but forcing it to be clear and sharp. Whispers began to be heard like small waves in a calm lake. 3412. Some guests looked at each other, shaking their heads with looks of curiosity and confusion. I felt Leo's gaze fixed on me as if he were begging me to do something to protect him. Alex ran from another table with a smile on his face that quickly turned to concern when he saw my expression. 3433. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, completely bewildered. I didn't answer him immediately. I just put the paper on the table and pushed it towards him. "Read it yourself," I said in a harsh voice, although inside I was a mess. Alex took the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and I saw his face turned pale and his hands tremble slightly. 3457. "What does this mean?" he asked, stunned, looking at me, and then at Leo, as if searching for a logical explanation. Ava, in her dazzling wedding dress, approached, frowning with a perfectly feigned surprise. "What is all this, some kind of bad joke?" she said in a soft voice, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. I looked at her directly in the eyes, my heart gripped by anger and fear. 3524. My grandson is allergic to shrimp, I said, my voice trembling with indignation. This is not a joke. This is an attempt at murder. My words fell like thunder, plunging the ballroom into a deathly silence. Some guests' mouths dropped open in astonishment, while others began to whisper, their eyes moving from me to Ava. 35:47. Ava let out a forced laugh, a mask to maintain her composure. Excuse me, Mrs. Williams, but there is no name on the paper. Are you going to believe a story that a child who found it made up? She said with a mocking tone, trying to make me look like a paranoid old woman. Some guests began to comment doubtfully. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. 36:06. Who would do something like that at a wedding? The blood boiled in my veins. Ava's audacity left me almost speechless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear off that wedding dress to reveal the truth, but I knew I had to remain calm for Leo, for my family. Suddenly, Lucy stood up, hugging Leo tightly, her eyes reened and fixed on Ava. That's enough, Ava, 36:31. Her voice sounded cold but full of pain, as if she couldn't contain herself any longer. Lucy stepped forward and slapped her, a smack that echoed throughout the ballroom. The dry, resounding sound broke the silence and the falsehood. Everyone froze, including me. Ava put a hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock, and then turned to Alex, sobbing. 36:56. You see, she's crazy with jealousy, and that's why she's attacking me. What have I done to deserve this? Lucy didn't back down, her fists clenched and her voice broken with rage. The only wicked person here is you. You wanted to harm an innocent child at your own wedding. Her words were like a knife that cut through the heavy air of the ballroom. 37:19. The looks of doubt began to center on Ava, and I saw her freeze, her false smile fading. Alex was motionless. His gaze went from me to Lucy and Ava, as if he were trapped between two worlds. Lucy, calm down, he said in a trembling voice, but I knew he was no longer sure who to believe. The murmurs of the guests grew like a tide that carried all eyes toward me, toward Ava, and toward Leo, my little grandson, who was trembling in Lucy's arms. 37:50. Ava tried to maintain her false calm, but I saw her hands shake when she spoke. This is a slander. I'm sure someone put that paper there to ruin our wedding. Her voice was sharp, but I noticed the panic in her eyes, as if her perfect mask was starting to crack. I couldn't stand her audacity anymore. The anger inside me exploded like a fire that consumed all my patience. I hit the table hard, making the glasses shake. 38:14. That's enough, I shouted in a voice so cold that it silenced even the music of the jazz band. David, come here. The young waiter, David, approached from a corner, his face pale with fear. His eyes darted from side to side as if he were trapped between the truth and the storm that was coming. 38:34. I showed him the paper, my voice trembling but firm. Confirm it. Is this the paper you received? David nodded repeatedly, stammering. Yes, ma'am, it is. A woman from the other table gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray. He lowered his head as if he wanted to avoid my gaze. 38:58. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm because I knew everyone in the ballroom was watching. Ava hurried to interrupt in a sharp, almost desperate voice. You're mistaken. I don't know anything about that. But before she could respond, a weak voice full of pain was heard from behind. 39:18. Gloria, Ava's younger sister, burst into tears and stood up from her chair. It wasn't my sister Ava who gave me that paper, the young woman said, trembling as tears ran down her cheeks. She asked me to give it to the waiter. I swear I didn't know what was inside. A murmur of astonishment ran through the ballroom. My God, I can't believe it. 3939. How is that possible? I looked at Gloria and my heart softened. She was barely 18 years old. Her eyes were red and full of confusion, as if she too was trapped in this nightmare. Ava turned abruptly and yelled at her sister, her face disfigured with anger. Shut up, Gloria! How dare you make up lies to harm your own sister? Her voice was sharp, but I saw her lips tremble as if she were struggling to hide the truth. 48. Gloria backed away, trembling from head to foot, and said between sobs, I'm not lying, sister. I just did what you asked. Her words were like a dagger that went through Ava's falsehood, leaving the entire ballroom in a state of shock. A close older relative shook his head. His voice choked. How is it possible to not even spare an innocent child? In the midst of the chaos, Lucy stepped forward, hugging Leo tightly, and said in an icy voice, If you keep denying it, we can ask to check the security cameras in the ballroom. Everything will be cleared up in a moment. Her words were like a stone, 4039, thrown into a lake, causing waves of panic. Ava's face turned ashen, her lips tightened, and her gaze desperately sought an escape. But there was no escape now. She didn't say another word, and that silence for me was the clearest confession of all. Alex froze, his hand trembling on Leo's shoulder, looking in horror at the woman he had just called his wife. Ava. 4105. His voice broke as if he were trying to cling to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, but his gaze, moving from the paper to Leo, said it all. I saw how his heart broke, just like mine had when he discovered the plot. An uncle stood up and shook his head, disgusted. It's unbelievable. Such wickedness on a day of celebration. 4125. His voice trembled as if he were holding back his indignation. After Lucy's challenge about the security cameras, a deadly silence took over the ballroom. Ava, the woman I once tried to accept as part of my family, stood there, her face pale and her lips pressed together, looking for one last excuse. But the truth was exposed, and she had nowhere left to run. 4150. Alex, my son, walked slowly toward her, his face tense and his eyes red, and asked her, Ava, tell me the truth. Is it true? His voice trembled as if he were begging for a glimmer of hope that it was all a mistake. But I knew that deep down, he also felt the painful truth. 4212. Ava took a step back, trying to force a twisted smile, but her eyes betrayed her panic. You don't believe me? She said in a broken voice, as if trying to cling to the last drop of Alex's trust. It's all their plan. I didn't do anything. But her words sounded weak, like a wind about to die out before a storm. I looked at her, my heart heavy with indignation and pain. 4237. This woman I thought would bring my son happiness was now standing in front of me like a stranger, a danger I hadn't seen before. Lucy, my adopted daughter, put a hand on Alex's shoulder and said in a voice she was holding back with all her might, Leo almost died because of this woman. Her words were as sharp as a knife. Ava yelled desperately, Shut up, you're just a jealous intruder. But Lucy didn't move. 4306. She was trembling with rage, but stood firm like a shield for Leo. How dare you call me jealous? Lucy responded in an icy voice. Look this child in the eyes and tell me you didn't try to hurt him. Leo clung to me, his little hand squeezing mine as if he feared being dragged into that nightmare. The guests began to stand up. The festive atmosphere had completely broken. A relative of our family, Mr. Johnson, hit the table with anger. 4332. This is a disgrace. We can't let this go. Murmurs of support were heard like waves that grew and drowned Ava in everyone's looks of contempt. Alex, trapped between truth and love, cried out, his voice broken with pain and indignation. "Leo is my son. You tried to kill my son at our own wedding." 43:57. His words were like a direct stab to Ava's heart, and I saw her burst into tears. But those tears, I knew, were not of repentance, but of being discovered. I placed the paper on the table and declared in a firm voice, "Anyone who tries to harm my grandson will never have the right to set foot in this family." My words resonated clear and unyielding, like a sentence. 44:22. Ava looked up, her eyes full of fire, but I saw defeat in her gaze. She had lost not only to me, but to the truth. The hotel security personnel approached and in a polite but firm manner asked Ava to leave the ballroom. "Ma'am, please come with us," one of them said in a cold voice. 44:45. Ava backed away looking for help, but no one sided with her. Many guests shook their heads, leaving their half-empty glasses and sighing with resignation. "Unbelievable," one whispered. "How can someone be so cruel?" another said, horrified. Alex stood motionless, his hands on his head as if trying to keep his world from collapsing. 45:10. Then, as if he no longer had the strength to stand, he slowly knelt in front of Leo, his voice choked. "Son, forgive me, my boy, for not protecting you." I saw tears run down his cheeks, and I felt my heart break in two. I helped Alex get up, squeezing his shoulders, and said in a grave but confident voice, "Luckily, we stopped it in time. This false happiness has to end here and now." 45:42. I looked at Ava, who was being escorted out amidst looks of contempt, and in my heart, I knew that she never was and never would be a part of this family. In the days that followed that nightmare wedding, my family was caught in a silent whirlwind where wounds still bled and unanswered questions floated in the air. 46:06. I felt as if I had just woken up from a nightmare in which I almost lost Leo, my grandson, whom I love more than life itself. The story of the failed wedding spread everywhere, from the small suburban streets to the conversations of distant relatives. The house phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some blamed Alex for blindly trusting Ava. Others sympathized with Leo, the innocent child who was almost the victim of an evil plot. 46:30. But for me, every call was just a painful reminder of what we had gone through. Alex became withdrawn after what happened. He was no longer the radiant man in the navy blue suit from the wedding day. Instead, he would take Leo to and from school in silence every day, his gaze filled with pain and guilt. 46:50. The name Ava, like a curse, was never mentioned in the house again. I looked at Alex with a pained heart, but I knew he needed time to heal, to find himself after being betrayed by the person he loved. I didn't blame him because I understand that love can get to people, but I also knew that our family had to rise from the ashes. I continued to care for Leo as I had since Maria left. 47:15. I cooked his favorite dishes like cheesy pasta or a soft pudding, trying to give him back a sense of security. But who really healed Leo's soul? It wasn't me, but Lucy, my adopted daughter. Every morning, she would carefully prepare his lunch for school, carefully choosing foods without shrimp or anything that could put him in danger. 47:39. She would even write a little note for the teacher explaining Leo's allergy, along with a smiling face drawn with a crayon which he loved. "Aunt Lucy, you draw so well," Leo would exclaim when he opened his lunchbox, and I would see his eyes light up as if a part of his innocence had returned. Every afternoon, Lucy would take Leo to the nearby park in 4802. I used to watch them from a distance, seeing how she taught him to fly a kite, showing him how to hold the string so it would fly high. Once Leo fell off the slide, and Lucy ran to him, picked him up, brushed the dust off his clothes, and whispered, It's okay. My love, I'm here." Leo's clear laughter echoed, a sound I thought I had lost forever, and which was now like a balm for my heart. 48:28. I looked at Lucy with infinite gratitude because she was not only a sister to him, but also like a second mother filling the void that Maria had left. One night, when Leo had a high fever, I saw Lucy spend the night by his side. She sat on a chair next to the bed, placing damp cloths on his forehead, while she quietly told him the story of a brave sparrow that flew through a storm. 48:53. I stood at the door watching in silence, and I realized that Alex's gaze followed Lucy for a long time. It was a complex look, full of gratitude and remorse, as if he was realizing something he had ignored for a long time. I didn't say anything. I just retreated in silence, giving them their space. 49:14. But in my heart, I began to hope that maybe there was a light at the end of our family's dark tunnel. One night during one of the rare dinners where we were all sitting together around the table with the warm pasta I had prepared, Leo suddenly looked up, his clear eyes fixed on Lucy. 49:33. "I want Aunt Lucy to be my mommy," he said in a soft but clear voice, as if it were something he had been thinking about for a long time. Everyone at the table fell silent. Lucy blushed and lowered her head, gripping the spoon as if to hide her embarrassment. Alex froze with tear-airy eyes, as if Leo's words had touched a very deep chord in his heart. I smiled. I'm 49:59. I put my hand on Alex's shoulder and said in a warm voice, "True happiness, son, doesn't come from a dazzling wedding dress, but from a sincere heart that knows how to love." Alex looked at me, then at Lucy, and I saw a small spark of hope shine in his eyes. Time passed and Ava disappeared completely from our lives like a toxic wind that had gone. Leo became a happy boy again, always stuck to Lucy with his red toy car and the drawing she made for him. 50:30. I saw him running and playing in the yard, feeling a great relief, but also a pang of pain, thinking about everything he had to go through. One day, Alex took Lucy's hand. He suddenly stood in front of me in the living room and said in a trembling but firm voice, "Mom, I know I made a mistake. I was blind." 50:50. I put Leo in danger. But this time, I don't want to let go of the person who has truly been by our family's side. Lucy lowered her head with flushed cheeks, but I saw a radiant smile on her lips. I nodded as tears silently rolled down my cheeks. "Son, the only thing I want is for you and Leo to be happy," I said in a choked voice. 51:13. That night, after Leo fell asleep, I sat by the window, watching the silver moon that stretched over the quiet street. Its soft light was like a reminder that although our family had gone through dark days, light always finds a way to break through. I whispered to myself. Family isn't always made of blood ties. Sometimes it's chosen with love and courage. 51:37. After that grim wedding, a new chapter full of light had truly begun for my family. I looked toward the yard where the kite that Lucy and Leo had flown the day before was still there, and I knew that although the old wounds might never fully heal, we would continue on together with love and strength as our support. After going through all this, I understood something very important. 52:01, that in life there are losses that cannot be replaced, betrayals that break the heart, but sincere love will always be the light that illuminates the way. Family is not only built with blood ties, but also with choices, with the courage to protect each other from darkness and danger. 52:19. It is sacrifice and true affection that brings lasting happiness, not false appearances. I want everyone to remember to listen. You have to let your heart guide you because sometimes a small gesture of attention can save a life. and it is kindness that gets us out of nights that seem to have no end. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. 5243. We do not tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence to maintain peace, or would you have dared to face everything to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. 5314. God always blesses us, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I will leave you two of the channel's favorite stories. I am sure you will be surprised.